Over the last week or so, more and more mock drafts have the Chicago Bears taking Texas running back Bijan Robinson with the 9th overall pick. As much as I like him as a draft prospect, under no circumstances should the Chicago Bears be taking him in the first round.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook, join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk, and make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started today. On the show today, we look at Bijan Robinson, the Texas running back, as a potential draft option for the Chicago Bears, and why I think, as good of a player he is, it is not a good idea for this Bears franchise. And we're going to rely a little bit on our friends from the Locked On NFL Draft podcast, specifically Keith Sanchez, because he put out a new mock draft this week for Mock Draft Monday that was one of these new mocks with Bijan Robinson going to the Chicago Bears. So we will hear briefly his analysis of Bijan and why he sees him as a pick worthy of that spot for a team like the Bears. We'll kind of try and get a better sense of why that might make sense and why some Bears fans are fully on board with Bijan Robinson as that 9th overall pick. Then we'll make the case as to why it's not a good idea and why this franchise, at least, is not in a position to take that player in the first round of this draft. And we'll wrap up by looking at some of the other running back options. I think the Bears should draft a running back on day 3 of the draft. And we can go through some options there that we can be pretty darn happy with, even if they're not quite up to Bijan Robinson standards in the first round. As I said, Keith Sanchez, one of the new hosts of Locked On NFL Draft, put out a new Mock Draft Monday episode this week. I highly recommend you go back and listen to it. They talk through some of the best and worst picks, their favorite and least favorite picks from this mock draft. But the top 10, as it went for Keith Sanchez, which I only go through the first 8 picks so you can have a sense of who was and wasn't on the board when they got to the Bears pick at 9. The first pick was C.J. Stroud to the Panthers, then Bryce Young to the Houston Texans. Is the Cardinals taking Will Anderson, the Colts taking Will Levis, so 3 quarterbacks in the top 4 picks plus Will Anderson, kind of maybe as expected. He has the Seahawks taking Anthony Richardson. I think I just said my math wrong there. All 4 quarterbacks in the first 5 picks plus Will Anderson. He has Jalen Carter then at 6 to the Lions, cornerback Christian Gonzalez to the Raiders at 7, the Falcons at number 8 taking offensive tackle Broderick Jones from Georgia, and then of course the Bears at 9 taking Bijan Robinson from Texas. A spot where, a couple of the top defensive players, Jalen Carter doesn't fall, Will Anderson doesn't fall, and one of the top cornerbacks in the draft, Christian Gonzalez, off the board, along with one of the offensive tackles that may be even a preferred scheme fit for the Bears in Broderick Jones from Georgia, who Keith Sanchez has ahead of the likes of Paris Johnson and Peter Skoronski in this draft. So he has the Bears saying, all right, one of the tackles is gone. The 2 top defensive players are both gone. One of the top cornerbacks is gone. Let's go get a playmaking running back to pair with Justin Fields in this backfield and make defenses have to decide on that read option play. Do you let Justin Fields keep it and try and tackle him? Or do you let him hand it off to clearly the best running back in this draft and a running back that gets comparisons to the likes of Saquon Barkley, like the big-time difference makers at running back in the NFL? And I also think Keith is a bigger proponent of the value of running backs. And so I wanted to turn to Keith and just take a quick snippet of his analysis of Bijan Robinson, why he loves him so much as a draft prospect, that he sees worthy of a top 10 pick just like this.
Bijan is a blue chip prospect, right? Like the whole it bothers me, man. I'm gonna be honest. The weight on the running back. And listen, I know I don't have a leg to stand on, right? Because these running backs keep popping up in the 5th, 6th, 7th round, and they keep producing. But I just don't like it. I don't like it, I don't have a leg to stand on. I don't have a very good argument. But one thing I do know is this, man. Bijan is probably one of 3 or 4 blue chip prospects. So you're talking about blue chip prospects, right? You're talking about immediate, instant impact, game changer type football players, right? I probably put him, Will Anderson, Jalen Carter. All 3 of those guys are like those type of difference makers, at their respective positions. So let's talk about Bijan, right? And okay, are you going to take Bijan Robinson or are you going to take the 3rd corner off the board, right? Like, and that's where I kind of it gets to me a little bit, man. I'm not going to lie, because you're telling me pass up on a blue chip prospect and then go ahead and go with the 3rd corner off the board, right? Or, the argument that, what running backs never won a Super Bowl, or, like a top tier running back never won a Super Bowl. Well, I mean, Tom Brady has 7 of them by himself, right? Like, I mean, it's not a lot left out of there, but I do have examples of running backs leading franchises to the playoffs, right? I have an example of Todd Gurley leading his team to the Super Bowl. I have Derrick Henry putting Ryan Tannehill on his back and running them to the playoffs. I have a Dallas Cowboys team where Ezekiel Elliott played really good football, and he was able to groom a 4th-round quarterback in Dak Prescott, right, because of the run game. So I have those instances where running backs play a key part of winning teams. And I get it, the threshold is Super Bowls, right? But the Super Bowl or bust situation is a very tough one to walk, right? Because, I mean, how many teams truly get that? So, I mean, everybody is unsuccessful, right? So I'm making an argument for the.
Again, that was Keith Sanchez speaking on the Locked On NFL Draft podcast about Texas running back Bijan Robinson and the value of drafting running backs. And I do agree with him on a number of those points there. I think sometimes we get so caught up in the running backs don't matter argument, that running backs don't have enough value argument, that we do forget that some running backs do have enough value. The likes of Christian McCaffrey and Derrick Henry, like the true top of the league running backs, can be those difference makers that do can put teams over the top. And certainly if you believe that Bijan Robinson is going to be at that caliber, is one of these rare blue chip prospects in this draft, then you can see why a team might justify him as a potential top 10 caliber pick in this year's NFL draft. I just don't think the Bears are in that position to make a pick like this. And it's no disrespect to Keith. I have a ton of respect for him and his knowledge and his work that he does in the NFL draft. And I know he's a big believer in Bijan Robinson, but I'm going to respectfully disagree and explain why this isn't the right pick for the Bears, even if maybe Bijan should be a top 10 pick in this draft. Next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, FanDuel is giving new customers a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. So when you place that first bet, if you get it wrong, FanDuel will give you up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if that first bet doesn't win. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up today and claim that no sweat first bet. You can bet on the NFL draft. You can bet on where someone like Bijan Robinson is going to go in this draft, who the first cornerback, who the first offensive lineman will be, which team is going to draft certain players, certain quarterbacks, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of different ways to bet on the draft with FanDuel, and you can have that first bet insured with a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NFL and NBA. It's not an indictment on Bijan Robinson to say that the Chicago Bears should not draft him with the 9th overall pick, and really for me, anywhere in the first round this season. I mean, if there were in some wild world where he somehow fell to the Bears' first, second round pick, which is like, 53rd overall off the top of my head, we could start to have that conversation. But that's not going to happen for Bijan, and that's why I don't think it's going to happen for the Chicago Bears either. He is a very good player in this draft, and you can easily see why he would be really fun in Chicago, why he would add something to this Bears backfield and be a dynamic threat for them. He might be the best receiving back in this draft. That's the kind of running back that we would look to pair with Justin Fields, right? Someone who can be a safety blanket, check down pass catcher who can make plays after the catch, but also be a dynamic runner and a dynamic athlete. Like, he does pretty much everything well. It's hard to find weaknesses in Bijan Robinson's game. But the Chicago Bears are not in a position to use the 9th overall pick, or even if they trade down in the first round, to use their first round pick on a running back. This draft pick needs to be a player that sets the foundation for this franchise and is here for not only this contract, but their second contract, and is a 10-year player for this organization. And first of all, we don't always see running backs make it 10 years in the NFL anymore, let alone the other reasons here, like just on average, like running back careers don't last that long and aren't at that high. And maybe Bijan Robinson's will. It's not a foregone conclusion that he couldn't, have a very long and productive career and be able to help out your team in a lot of different ways. Again, I don't want this to be too much about Bijan specifically, but it is about positional value and how the Chicago Bears have needs in this draft and on this roster that need to be filled in this draft. That doesn't mean they should use the 9th overall pick and reach for whatever their biggest need is, but it does mean that when they're trying to decide between prospects, you do have to account for needs in terms of how you're going to rank players. So it doesn't mean at 9, you take whatever offensive tackle is there because you have to take an offensive tackle. But it does mean that when you're trying to decide between the offensive tackle, the cornerback, the defensive lineman, or the running back that you like, you have to look at the rest of the draft and the rest of your roster and say, okay, if we don't take the offensive tackle here, can we get the offensive tackle in the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th round? If we don't take the cornerback here, can we get the cornerback in the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th round? And same thing with the running back position. I mean, maybe you do want to upgrade at running back. I think the Bears will ultimately draft one at some point, and we'll get into some of those possibilities, as I started to say there, later on in this podcast. But there's such a variety of needs that the Bears have to fill, and so few draft picks to get away with it, that when you're drafting this high, you need to get a guy who's not that Bijan Robinson isn't going to have that immediate impact, because he absolutely will. But Bijan Robinson is not filling a void per se. He's adding to a position where you already have talent. You don't already have Bijan Robinson's talent there. Sure, absolutely. But you do already have Donta Foreman, who is by all means a strong, physical, in between the tackles type running back who can be, he was almost 1,000-yard rusher this past season in a bad Carolina Panthers offense. And you have Khalil Herbert, who has great speed and explosiveness and led the NFL in yards per carry and looks like he could be a 1,000-yard rusher. Neither one is a great receiver out of the backfield, or at least a proven receiver out of the backfield. Neither one is particularly consistent in pass protection. Both have weaknesses, and in areas that Bijan Robinson could improve the team, and he would be the clear-cut number 1 running back. And certainly neither one of those two is so good that you just can't, that you don't want a running back, because those guys are so good that you can't, there's just no reason to replace them. Like, sure, Bijan Robinson would absolutely be an upgrade for the Bears. But if you don't draft Bijan, you're fine at running back. You've got 2 guys that can handle the main carries, and you'd like to still add someone to complement them, but you would be fine if you don't get Bijan Robinson in this draft. But if you don't get a right tackle in this draft, your offensive line is going to be rough, and that's really important for Justin Fields. If you don't get a pass rusher, an edge rusher in this draft, your defensive line is going to be the worst in the NFL again, or at least your defensive ends are going to be the worst in the NFL again, and your defense will then struggle, and Justin Fields will struggle, and the team will struggle as a result. Cornerback maybe isn't as massive of a need, but you'd like to upgrade your number 3 spot. It's not quite in the same category. But, if you don't get Bijan Robinson in this draft, you're fine. If you don't get a tackle or an edge rusher, you're not fine. And so at some point, those positions need to be prioritized. And if you don't take one with the 9th overall pick, which you don't have to, you're running a risk of your ability to truly upgrade at those positions and get difference makers by feeling like, okay, now we have to take both of them with either your 2 second-round picks or that first third-round pick that's 64th overall. Because once you get past them, it's really hard to find guys that you're really going to be absolutely in love with as a week 1 starter who's going to be a difference maker for your team. Whereas, by comparison, after the third round, you can still find very good running backs. Consistently, year after year, we see even the best running backs in draft classes ultimately go after the first round and go on day 3 of the draft even. So we'll look at some of the other prospects that aren't Bijan Robinson, that won't be the Bears' second or third round picks, that could be really good fits for what the Bears need in their backfield and maybe just represent a potential steal later on in this draft. Next on Locked On Bears. The other running backs are not going to be as sexy, as exciting, as fun in terms of the name recognition that Bijan Robinson carries, right? We can all sort of see in our heads how well he ran in college at Texas and how fun it was to watch him, catch passes out of the backfield and really be, a big-time difference maker for the Texas offense, and how that would pretty well translate to the NFL. But at the same time, we know that each and every year, good running backs fall well past the first round, and oftentimes you can find really good running backs in the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th rounds. I mean, look at the Bears' backfield last season. 3rd-round pick David Montgomery, 5th-round pick Khalil Herbert. The absolute strength of this Bears team. You look at some of the other leading rushers in the NFL this season. Of course, there are first-round picks on that list. It's not to say that the first-round running backs are bad. It's just that you can also find other very productive running backs later in this draft. Nick Chubb was the 3rd leading rusher, 2nd-round pick, 35th overall. Miles Sanders, who was a free agent this year, was the 5th leading rusher, 2nd-round pick, 53rd overall. Dalvin Cook, 41st overall in the 2nd round. Aaron Jones of the Green Bay Packers, who Luke Getsy coached, 5th-round pick for them. A.J. Dillon, their backup, 2nd-round pick for them. Jamal Williams of now the New Orleans Saints, who was drafted by the Packers but played for the Detroit Lions last year. He was a 4th-round pick, and he was, the 11th leading rusher this past season? And speaking of Jamal Williams, I want to throw a little Easter egg in here for you Locked On Bears listeners that are the long haulers, right, that make it through to the end of every podcast, like into the 3rd segment, of my 3rd segment listeners. Because some people, they just come for the beginning, they dip out after the 1st segment, and they say, screw it, I picked up the little tidbit that I want. But here's a little nugget buried in here for you that I have not seen anyone report this. We'll call this a scoop. I didn't thoroughly look around, but I haven't seen anyone report that the Chicago Bears tried to sign Jamal Williams and that the Chicago Bears offered Jamal Williams more money than the New Orleans Saints offered Jamal Williams. And Jamal Williams took less money to go to the New Orleans Saints than Ryan Poles and the Chicago Bears were offering him. Now, that's in terms of a per-year average. I did not know what the guaranteed money was, and perhaps the Saints were offering a better percentage of guaranteed money than what the Bears was, but the Bears made a run at Jamal Williams, tried to sign him, made him presumably a higher per-year average offer. I can say that for sure, a higher per-year average offer. So I don't know, a better offer, but an offer with more money per year on the contract than what he took from the New Orleans Saints. But he chose the Saints over the Bears, but it shows that Ryan Poles was willing to spend a little bit more at running back, and put 2 and 2 together, the Bears were willing to spend more on Jamal Williams than they were willing to offer David Montgomery, based on what the contract is that David Montgomery got from the Lions and the contract that Jamal Williams got from the Saints. And if the Bears were willing to offer Jamal Williams more than what the Saints gave him, then that means they were offering Jamal Williams more than what David Montgomery signed for with the Detroit Lions. There's a little scoop there from Locked On Bears here for you 3rd segment listeners. Thank you for listening to the end of every Locked On Bears podcast. It's you people that I do this for, that I really, you guys are the diehards, the ones who listen every day, that listen all the way through. And we're not even done with the segment here. We have still not gotten to the draft running backs that I want to talk about here, but I wanted to throw in the Jamal Williams nugget there since he came up here as a 4th-round pick who ended up being a very, very good running back in the NFL, a running back who was almost a Chicago Bear instead of Donta Foreman. But when we look in this draft class to try and find that Jamal Williams, that Aaron Jones, that Khalil Herbert of this draft class, or even just guys that could be really good complements to what the Bears have right now, a few names I want to run through quickly. First of all, the darling of draft Twitter. Everyone on draft Twitter loves Tyjae Spears from Tulane. I'm going to try really hard to not call him Tajay Sharp at any point in this podcast or future podcasts, but it's going to happen at least once, so I apologize in advance. But Tyjae Spears, the Tulane running back, smooth athlete, looked great down at the Senior Bowl. Smart, good vision, playmaker after the catch out of the backfield. Although he wasn't throwing the ball a ton, but when he was, he had a couple of games with a bunch of receiving yards and a bunch of games where he got one catch for 3 yards. And it just didn't feel like they didn't quite make that as big of a part of the offense at Tulane as they could have to get more out of his skill set, but put him in Chicago, and I think he can be a playmaker after the catch. Not great in pass protection, admittedly. There's some struggle there, but not awful, but just not great. But again, not used there a ton. So there's potential room for improvement. But I love Tajay Spears. Everybody loves Tajay Spears. And if he's there, when the Bears are on the clock with their first fourth round pick, he might go earlier than that. But I think that's got to be a name that I would be excited about. Or Chase Brown from Illinois, transferred there from one of the SEC schools. I forget where he was before Illinois, but a big-bodied workhorse back there, a guy who carried the ball a lot for them, but also ran some pretty good routes out of the backfield and not bad in pass protection either. He could certainly, there's a couple little technique things you could improve on there, but someone who I think would fit that Bears mold of being able to be on the field on third downs, but could grow into a lead back role over time. I do feel like with a guy like Chase Brown, he ran a 4.43 or so at the NFL scouting combine. He's kind of a one-speed running back. He's not electric. He's not explosive. And he's big, but he's not the world's strongest running back either. So I think with Chase Brown, there's a limited upside there. You can give him a lot of volume, but he's not going to be the home run guy. And, I think that's part of why he's a day 3 running back prospect. There's a lot to like, but it's not and Bijan has the juice, right? And Chase Brown from Illinois doesn't quite have the same juice, and that's why he's a day 3 running back prospect. Somebody with some juice, how about Deuce Vaughn from Kansas State? This guy is a great receiver. They put him at the slot quite a bit and let him run wide receiver routes there and can make plays after the catch out of the backfield as good as, I don't say as good as anyone in this draft because Bijan's probably got him beat there, but only because Deuce Vaughn is 5'5", 180 pounds. That is shorter and lighter than Tariq Cohen. For comparison, he is tiny. Now, he was durable at Kansas State, took a lot of hits and got back up every time. But at 5'5", 180 pounds, he's a foot shorter than me and lighter than me. I am bigger than this running back in every way, shape, or form. He got bulldozed in pass protection because, again, he's half the size of the pass rushers coming at him. So you kind of know he's this Jaquiz Rodgers, Tariq Cohen hybrid running back receiver who's just absolutely tiny in the backfield, but really small as well. But man, is he explosive and a playmaker, and he's durable. So at this point, you're not super worried about him holding up. It's just a matter of, how well that perfectly translates to the NFL. But speed is speed, and playmaking is playmaking at any size. And somebody will take a chance on him on day 3 of the draft. And if we want to go deep sleeper here, one guy to keep an eye on, maybe he goes undrafted. Maybe he's a 7th round guy. I mean, who knows? Maybe he could go earlier, but he's not projected very high in the draft. It's Travis Dye from USC. One of these backs who's got great vision, really smart, knows how to make his cuts on a dime perfectly, fluid, can kind of come in and out of his breaks really, really well there. He's a natural at the running back spot, really strong in pass protection. He was reliable there for the Trojans. As good of a pass protection back as you're going to see in this draft, and also a pretty good receiver. Pretty good hands, only a couple of drop passes here and there, and knew how to make guys miss out of the backfield, gets a lot of yards after the catch. Kind of like Chase Brown, though, limited speed, limited size, unlike Chase Brown. Dye is 5'11", 6-foot-ish, on the lighter side of 200 pounds. So he's not big and not going to be the strong guy who runs over you. And he's also not super fast and explosive. So the ceiling is definitely limited there. I don't think he's ever going to be more than a third down back rotational guy in there. But what the Bears need is a strong pass protector who can catch out of the backfield. And I think Travis Dye would be a great number 3 running back with some special teams upside in there and compete with Travis Homer and be a potential developmental guy there to pair at the bottom of the depth chart. You can wait on running back in this draft. Maybe you don't wait till the 7th round with Travis Dye, but he's a late round undrafted option there that I think could be a sneaky fit in Chicago to kind of fill one of the roles that they're looking for behind their existing running backs. So I hope that gives you a better idea of the landscape of running back and why Bijan is just not the right fit for this team right now. If they had filled all their holes in free agency and then Bijan is there at 9, and it could be that put him over the top luxury kind of pick to add to it, I could get a little bit more on board, but the needs are too big. And honestly, if you're going luxury pick, I would almost rather go for a wide receiver or a tight end with that 9th overall pick to add even more depth at that position that's even more valuable than a really good running back. But Bijan is better than all the wide receivers and tight ends in this draft. So I certainly would understand if the Bears were in that position, but they are not. Maybe the Eagles at 10, they're in a position to take a Bijan Robinson and kind of elevate their team. They did sign Rashad Penny, but that would be a really smart pick, or a smarter pick for them, I would say, than the Bears at 9. But we'll see. I don't think we could put anything past Ryan Poles at this point. Whatever he ends up doing in this draft, you can be sure we'll break it all down for you right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to podcasts. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making the Locked On Bears podcast your first listen today. If you're looking for your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Draft podcast. You heard Keith Sanchez in the first segment. It's he and Damian Parsons every day, 5 days a week, talking all things NFL draft. Those guys are a lot of fun. They're really smart. They put in the work. They watch the film. They write down the prospects. They write up scouting reports. They're not just, BSing or having somebody else do the work for them. Like, they know ball. They coach football. I think Keith Sanchez is a coach. And man, I tell you what, if you want draft analysis as we get closer and closer to draft day, check out those two guys for your second listen today. Coming back tomorrow to make Locked On Bears your first listen again tomorrow. And of course, you have to come back for your next opportunity to bear down.